This episode of Simulation Nation is brought to you by Avcon Incorporated, your one-stop shop for everything wearable simulator and standardized patient.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Simulation Nation, where we talk to the new SSH president-elect, Matt Charnetski.
Congratulations, Matt.
Yeah, and so this is exciting because at the time of the interview, he wasn't actually elected yet. He was still kind of campaigning at that point.
Yes.
So it's very exciting to now kind of see that come. I'm really excited, too, to see what he's going to be doing with his background as someone who came from more of that paramedic, IT, CHSOS vibe coming into that president-elect area. I am really excited to kind of see that take on it. And I think it's really important for those who are in that sim ops role to see someone kind of who came from where they were into such a presidential position.
Yeah.
I think that's really exciting, right?
But I think that really speaks to what SSH is all about now, right? And I think
it's the progression,
exciting.
right? Like,
yeah,
I think it's exciting because
it
I think it's the progression of seeing that come forward. And so I'm really excited to see more about that. And I also wasn't on this interview, so I am excited to also learn more.
He has so much, again, such an incredible person to talk to. You could talk to him for hours.
Yeah.
He said that he went to his last job interview, which I think was at Dartmouth Hitchcock, where he works, and he interviewed for literally 2 hours. So you can talk to Matt about anything. I mean, literally anything. He has life wealth of experience in his life as well as his work experiences, but is just also super easy to talk to and super enthusiastic. So I'm so happy that he was elected in, and congratulations to him.
Yeah, so we will learn more again as we get into this episode. Matthew Charnetski, to address it formally here, the Director of Simulation-Based Education and Research and the Interprofessional Continuing Education at Dartmouth and Hitchcock.
Why is every single name miles long of the program?
I don't know. They like to make it a mouthful.
For real.
Matt's not just designing simulation, he's helping build frameworks. He holds MSMS, CHSE, and CHSOS. Sorry, Chessie. I don't know why I said CHSE. Chessie and CHSOS, beginning his journey as a paramedic IT specialist, now leading big-scale initiatives in certification, accreditation, and simulation policy. He's played key leadership roles in SSH and works with Anaxel, SimGhost, and ASPE, pushing for professional recognition for simulation roles, global consensus, and education that actually translates. Today, we dig into his vision for SSH, the future of simulation, and we move from good to exceptional in this area. So let's hear from Matthew Charnetski.
Okay, Matt, thanks so much for joining us on the Simulation Nation podcast. So I'm very interested to hear a little bit about your background and how you got started in simulation. We've been connected for quite a while now, working with the AWISH committee, which we're going to talk about today. But if you could just tell me kind of how you got started and what developed your love for simulation education, similar to many other people in this world.
Totally. My background was a little strange, and we all say that, right? Because everyone gets into sim for weird.
The path isn't straight, for sure.
Never. So for me, I didn't know I was doing simulation for a number of years before I got into simulation, and it started really with wilderness medicine. I was working in the U.S. Antarctic program, so I just graduated from college, moved to Antarctica. Was working in a lab stockroom. I worked in IT for a while down there. I was down there for a number of years, but while I did that, I also volunteered on the Joint Antarctic Search and Rescue Team. And we just called it scenario-based training. What I didn't realize was we were using standardized patients to practice crevasse extrication and moving patients on and off of mountains and all of the treatment things, all the things we all do regularly. And so I started with that and then kind of wandered away for a little while. So that was while I was in Antarctica. Then I left, decided I wanted to become a paramedic, couldn't afford it. So I talked my way into doing electronic medical records implementation. That was during meaningful use, if that means anything to anyone anymore. Did that and built some electronic medical record systems while I was in paramedic school. Then worked as a full-time paramedic, as a critical care interfacility transport medic for a service we did 911 for a suburban area. I also did 911 for a county area back in Iowa. And then we did adult critical care, PICU, NICU, transport. So I got kind of the whole gamut of that, which was cool. And then as I was kind of trying to figure out what my next step was, I didn't know what simulation was. And a friend of mine brought me a job description and said, I think you should think about this. I don't know what paramedics do when they're done being paramedics, but they're looking for someone with 5 years of IT experience, with healthcare IT being preferred, and 5 years of patient care experience with paramedics being preferred. And I looked at it and I thought, well, I don't know what simulation is, but I'm interested in education. I love technology. I really like health professions education broadly, and healthcare clearly. We'll at least be friends. I should interview for this job. And I spent the next month reading about healthcare simulation, and I went to this interview at Des Moines University back in Iowa. And it was supposed to be a 30-minute interview, and I think I was there almost 4.5 hours.
Wow.
And all I thought in that moment was, I want to do this for the rest of my life. This is the coolest job that's ever existed.
Yeah.
And so I started as an operations specialist there, subsequently got my master's in medical and healthcare simulation, moved on, started a couple of programs, helped set up some different things, and then have landed here in New Hampshire, where I'm at Dartmouth Health as the Director of Simulation-Based Education and Research and Interprofessional Continuing Education.
That's amazing.
We also partner. I have like 6 titles with this job. It's a different structure than most. So I'm also at Geisel School of Medicine, and then at Colby Sawyer College School of Nursing and Health Professions. So kind of all over the place. But then also working on my PhD at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. And I mean, to say I'm all in on sim is probably a little bit of an understatement, but I just love it so much.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that most of us that stay, not everybody that gets into sim loves sim as much as we do, but I think that the people that stay and really invest and want to give back in many ways, that our path was, we saw how this could make a difference, and getting that vision creates this passion that is almost unquenchable in some ways, of more information, more, more investment, more building the next generation. And so that's really cool. And I've met 2 people now in this world that have been to Antarctica. I think there's probably a total of, I don't know, maybe 2,000 in this world. I mean, you said that so casually, like, yeah, I spent some time in Antarctica. It's like, no. I heard from from one of my former nursing students, actually, because he spent time in Antarctica, but he talked about it's rigor to get there. I mean, you can't just like be like, hey, like, I feel like signing up for this. Like, there's a whole process that goes into this, and, physically fit, and, all those things. So, and also like a mentality, right? He said it was super close, like, because, base camp is, you don't really venture much beyond all of those things. So again, really cool. And probably an amazing life experience for you as well, I'm sure.
Best way I could have spent my 20s. And chances are, depending on when your former student was there, either we know each other or we know a lot of people in common. I'm surprised at the number of folks that have stayed in the program since I left, and really been doing some pretty great work down there. But
Yeah. I mean, again, I think I think he was in his 20s too, and he just got back a couple of years ago. So, but he absolutely loved it, and he said it's really hard to not want to keep going back over and over and over again. He wants to get some more education and things, but he's just said it's a different world. It's almost like being in a bubble or in a cocoon, and everybody's close, and amazing stuff. So again, really cool, really, really cool. So, one of the things that you mentioned was the sim ops, and so it sounds to me like your title started in a sim ops position. When was that in time, as far as years, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, that would have been 2013, 2014, something like that.
Okay.
And I was really lucky, and I didn't know it at the time. To be perfectly honest, I'm lucky much of the time and don't always know it in the moment. The folks that had kind of stepped into that program, so they had gotten a new director, they had gotten a couple of new staff, and they had moved some things around. That program was pretty progressive for its time in a number of ways, and one of them was they had, for a long period of time, had operations specialists, not just technicians, not just a sim tech, right? And they also really engaged with their operations specialists. So we weren't just there for operations. We assisted with debriefing. We helped with teaching teamwork and communication. And while I was there, and in most of the subsequent iterations, a lot of the folks that ended up as operations specialists there came with some kind of clinical background. Most of them were paramedics. So there was a limited amount of things that we could teach clinically to the medical students. So we
Mm-hmm.
had a little bit of a leg up there. But it was really underscored that we weren't just there to turn on the mannequin and push the buttons. We were part of the conversation in development, recommending equipment, recommending setup and flow. We were part of the conversation, like I said, about teamwork and communication, and specifically helped with the debriefing of that. We developed the pre-briefing, and we delivered a lot of the pre-briefing for that. So we had faculty that came in, and our faculty worked with us pretty regularly. I think we had 6 or so. And obviously they were the subject matter experts in teaching physicians. But we then had the opportunity to kind of fully exercise our full skill set, which was really cool. And I didn't realize at the time how unusual that really was.
Yeah, I would say
In
definitely
in
for
a sense.
2013ish. That's early. Because again, you mentioned the SimTech piece, and that I think a lot of positions started as SimTech, and it may go back to what we're doing and going to be discussing future. But this AWISH thing, where they didn't know what to call them, they didn't know how to classify them because it was a whole new position. But I would like to talk a little bit about why it's really important that we're considering it as a simulation operations specialist versus a sim technician. So, do you have any feelings or thoughts on that as far as when it transitioned and why it's so important?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts and feelings about most things, really.
Well, that's probably why you were in the interview for 4.5 hours.
I suppose so. Yeah, right. So I think so at my institution currently, we still have sim techs, and we actually look at it as a progression.
Okay.
So we have sim tech senior, and then operations specialist. And the reason we structured it that way is there still isn't a clear cut pathway into simulation. And so we wanted to make sure we had a stepwise way to approach people coming in to say, oh, you don't have experience in healthcare simulation, or maybe you're coming out of IT, or you're coming out of healthcare, or whatever one of the pillars that you're coming to us with, or none of the pillars. You're just a person we really want to work with.
Hmm.
We know we can train you on all of the different things, so we can bring you in as a sim tech. It's a little bit more of an entry level position. I think from a requirement perspective, it requires a GED, a New Hampshire license, and a pulse. Maybe it's pretty low bar to get in the door. But then we help you, and we train you, and we grow you. And as you get towards senior SimTech status, you're taking your certified healthcare simulation operations specialist certification. For us, you become a BLS instructor. You get your 2 years of experience. You work towards a degree, whether it's an associate or bachelor's is a little bit flexible. And in that way, we create this continuum. And I think when it first started, when we first started seeing SimTechs pop up, there was an acknowledgement that there was a technical component that could require some support, or would benefit from some direct support.
100%. As the nurse that is not technically oriented,
Totally,
for
totally.
sure. For sure.
And then as it's evolved, I think what we've seen is simulation is now just becoming its own freestanding body of knowledge. And we see that in the education sphere, where people are coming out with master's degrees in education, or master's degrees in their professional field with a focus on education, and strangely are coming out without specific education on sim, or very basic education on sim. So we see that now masters in sim are becoming a thing. Same thing on the technical side, where it's not an IT person coming in with networking capabilities and troubleshooting. That's super valuable, but that's not everything that it encompasses to run the operations of a simulation program.
100%.
And then it's grown past just the technical side into the logistics of sim are weird. When you talk to someone who's been doing sim for a long time, the way they think about the flow of an educational event within sim is different than the way someone who is a super well trained and accomplished educational expert, it's just different. The considerations are different. The development needs are different. And so as that became a thing, we'd sort of joke, in order to be really good in simulation operations, you have to be a specialist in generalizing in all of these different things. And so now we take the SimGhost capability framework or the CHSOS blueprint, and you look at those different pillars, and we're saying, yes, you have to have technology background, some of it in AV, some of it in computers. You have to have some healthcare knowledge. And, I joke with my team, a lot of my team is not specifically clinical, but 5 years into working as an operations specialist, you have a clinical background. It's not a standard clinical background, but you know so much about healthcare.
Yeah.
So you've got that aspect to it. There's the theater component that you have to bring into it to make sure people are able to engage with that fiction contract.
Yeah.
And so in doing so, you become a specialist in the operations of simulation. And now I think we're seeing it grow even further to, how do you budget? How do you write your strategic plan? How do you talk about sim to people who don't know sim to get them to want to help you do sim?
Yeah.
And all of that is just growing and growing, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think it's really important to understand that if you take one person from your institution and you make them the simulationist and they're the chief cook and bottle washer, they're not working from their strengths in all aspects of what it takes to do this and do it well. I do a ton of curriculum reviews with educators, both interprofessional education as well as nursing. And one of the things that I'm seeing consistently is if you don't have, if you don't have somebody dedicated into your sim center to actually that loves sim, then the simulation learning is stunted, and it's always going to be a challenge. But the other piece of this is if you're not, once you get that foundation there, okay, now look at what their strengths are and start looking for ways to support them outside of their own strengths to make sure that simulation program has every opportunity to thrive. And when that happens, that's when you start to really see the power. And so from my perspective, when we got our first sim ops, and this was late in the game, I would say 2015, they came to me and they had organized all the warranties. They had organized when the last preventative maintenance was done. And from my perspective, I was just trying to catch as catch can all those years. And they took all of the things that I couldn't pay any attention to and organized it in a way that when you went to leadership to speak to them, they understood why. And they understood the importance of whatever it was that we were requesting. But it was my inability to do that plus all of the other things, things fall by the wayside. So having those supports, and as you said, simulation education is its own animal. And even with the SP modality, from my perspective, I can very quickly imagine how many SPs I need, all of those things. But in asking someone else to do it, and I remember actually training my daughter who worked at the university at the time, I trained her how to do it. And she said, she was so frustrated. She struggled. And I'm like, you just have to do this. I'll go through and help you, but you just have to do it 1 or 2 times and you'll have it. And now she thinks about it the same way I do. So I totally understand how you're saying that as you get more experience, you envision that. I think it's also great, the thing that you mentioned as far as like the professional ladder, right? To give people places to go. And I think within the SP world, that's something that we're still working on, is how to do that in a way that people that, again, start into the SP world and absolutely adore it, want to progress in their professional careers too. And so creating that ladder is really important. And that's some of the work that we're doing with AWISH. So I wanted to bring you on and talk a little bit about this, because you actually have historic background of before AWISH was even formed, or what happened. And so could you tell a little bit, just for our listeners, it's the Alliance for Workforce Identification in Healthcare Simulation.
Simulation in healthcare.
There you go. Because the H is at the end. So could you talk a little bit about how this whole thing got started and really what got things brewing, and give the background behind that?
Absolutely. So as you may imagine, I really like talking to people and hearing about what they're up to, right? And so I'll poke at people a whole lot. And a few years ago, Scott Crawford and I were talking. I was down in El Paso for something, and we were talking, and he was talking about some work he was doing, uh, trying to get operations specialists classified with the Department of Labor because he's at Texas Tech. And Texas Tech, like a lot of state institutions, will only allow you to use job titles that are categorized by the Department of Labor. And so in doing so, he was running into what I think a lot of us have run into, where you end up following these HR rules to come up with a title, and you end up with a lab coordinator 2 or a IT technician healthcare representative 5, or, you know, I mean, whatever it happens to be. And they're not great titles. They're not useful when you're trying to advertise or trying to get people in. They don't really describe what's going on, but it's the closest fit we've got. And so he had been doing some work to try and do this work. And with the Department of Labor, it's every, I think, 5 to 7 years, they allow for applications for new classifications to be created and all this. So Scott was diligently working away at this. And in a separate conversation, I was talking to Haru Okuda, who was talking about work that they had done in the past. And this was pre-me, but it was Haru and Bob Armstrong and Jeff Miller, and I'm sure a bunch of other people who I wish I knew who it was so I could mention them. But folks that had done some work trying to do something similar. It wasn't through the Department of Labor. I don't honestly remember exactly what it was through, but some other government agency that was another pathway to classification. And it kind of made some progress, and then it sort of fizzled out because it required some support that maybe didn't exist yet. And so in that moment, I thought, oh, well, Haru and Scott absolutely need to talk about this. I think this is really important. And so bringing them together, and as we talked about it, we kind of started formulating the idea that in the name of collaboration, in the name of advocacy, which at that time had just become one of our strategic pillars for the Society for Simulation in Healthcare, looking at how we advocate for the profession broadly, kind of created this idea that we really need to bring together, because this is a United States focused effort, right? Department of Labor for the United States. We needed to bring together the major simulation societies from the United States and North America to put together a plan for this. So we brought together at IMSH, not last IMSH, but the IMSH before, we brought together folks from Enaxel, ASPE, SSH, and SimGhosts as representatives of all of that to really start making an earnest effort at this. And to look at how we could potentially put forth something compelling to have operations specialists, standardized patients, and standardized patient educators, I believe, are the titles. It may be a little more fluid than that, but the titles that we would put forward. And it's an interesting process because they don't tell you when it's coming until right before it opens. We know it happens with some frequency, so we kind of have a guess that sometime in 2027-ish, we should see it open again. And you put forth just sort of a statement saying, here are the reasons why. Here are the numbers of people that are in these positions. Here are the educational requirements and the certifications that are out there. Here's what's available to demonstrate that this is a real profession and something that is important enough to be classified by the Department of Labor. And then that provides guidance for salary recommendations. It provides guidance on titling, right? So it's, even with the Department of Labor, if we put forward, let's say, simulation operations specialist, then there's a bunch of working titles that go with that. So it's not, we're not all married to the one title, but it gives you some collection of things that it can include. Standard job duties, standard expectations related to OSHA and that sort of thing. And then also helps us with census data. So it also then makes it so it's something that can be categorized, recorded, and counted. So then we have a better sense. Because right now, even as we put together these arguments for classification, a lot of it is, what's our best guess for how many operations specialists are out there? What's our best guess for how many human simulation educators or standardized patient educators are out there? And we've got a lot of data that gives us a number, but we know that data is incomplete because there's lots of people that they engage with the societies once every couple of years,
Yeah.
or they're doing this work and they're looking at our standards of best practice and they're using all of these things and they're doing really high quality work. They just aren't in a position to raise their hand. They're the one person show who is too busy having to try and put out all the fires around them to be able to step up and engage with these sorts of things. So for these societies to be able to advocate for that and then help us count it in the future just helps us keep moving those professions forward.
Yeah, and I think it's really tying it into this advocacy piece. I think it's really important that we think about this. You know, I know as I started my standardized patient program, I had my head down and I was working as hard as I could for probably 2 or 3 years. And then when I saw the success of it, all of a sudden I picked my head up and I said, I've got to tell other people about this. This is really cool. Like, this is a really innovative way. And it's had, like, you want it so bad to succeed that you just focus on it for so long. But then when I
Totally.
picked my head up and started talking about it to other people and getting other people excited about the opportunities, it's kind of like what happened in healthcare simulation in general, right? We all were just white knuckling it, getting research, publishing, going to conferences and presentations, and then all of a sudden it was like, we need to let people outside of the simulation world know that this bubble exists, right? And that we're doing really amazing things. And I think I don't know if it was Haruth that said this, but somebody said this to me recently, is that healthcare simulation is the most researched aspect of healthcare education out there, because it is it started in the late 90s, early 2000s, and so it's fairly new. It's gotten a lot of support, and there's not a lot of old legend about how you do things. And so that really has informed us. The research has really informed us, but now is getting the word out. I personally talked to Kathy Scott, at the time she was on the regulation committee, or nursing regulation committee for the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. She used to be chief nursing officer at Baylor, I believe, Baylor Health. And so she had built a sim hospital and was really involved in sim, but it had been a few years since she had done that. And when I talked to her talked to her about the fact that there is credentialing, that there is accreditation, she was really surprised to find that information out. And so the idea of advocating and letting people know, inviting legislators to come in, all of those things, it's so important that we do that. But it is, I think we're now just all collectively picking our heads up and saying, how can we advocate for this in a better way? Um, it just, it's really, again, from my perspective, I am really excited about it. And I helped to run Healthcare Simulation Week a few years ago, and it was kind of the platform that I wanted to talk about, is all the different, globally even, what's out there and what's available to people to help inform their work and support what they do. So again, really cool stuff. So from the idea of us building this, these cases for the three different segments of healthcare simulation that we feel are misrepresented or underrepresented, because we work in bureaucracies with HR departments that require things like this. What would you say is some of the takeaways that you have experienced or learned along the process? Because for me, I've had some really, things I had never considered, and being on that committee has really opened my eyes to some things.
Yeah. I think the first thing has been, this is another example of our societies coming together, and globally, right? SESAM is involved in some things, and SimOne in Canada, and all these different groups having the opportunity to come together and find all of the commonalities that we have, and then also like just incorporating those different perspectives, the needs of these different groups, of these different professions. So many similarities, majority similarities, I would argue, and then also some special considerations that each of them need. And I think bringing that together and having the opportunity to have shared work that we are all looking at from our different perspectives has then helped, at least for me, helped me to be able to better engage with each of those societies and members, and certainly the boards of each of those societies, to kind of get a better feel for their mission, right? We all have our mission and vision statements that say whatever they happen to say, but then seeing this as a functional place where we're able to engage with it, and that functional project we're working on has a clear outcome in mind that has a real impact on, we don't do sim because we just like sim. I mean, we do that sometimes too, but we're here because we understand the value of it from an education perspective for our learners. We understand the long-term impact it has for our learners' future patients. And so in doing this, through this advocacy, like you were saying, I think this has been a great opportunity to see a real impact of that, not just I want my legislators to understand the value of this so that they'll help me fund it. I want that too. But also right, this is why all of us rowing in the same direction is so important. And why, as we do this, we have an ability to not just have it be that, we come together for our conferences and that fills our cup because we have a chance to talk with like-minded people. We have the opportunity to share outside of simulation the power of the thing that we do, the value of the thing that we do. And to your point, we're seeing more people getting on board with that. And that's really cool that as folks first get over the shock of us trying to describe to them what it means to have robots that blink and breathe and cry and sweat and have babies, or that we can put things on standardized patients to allow us to do procedures to them, or that we have just people who are trained to exhibit all of these different conditions and concerns and whatnot, but then let them get past that and then understand this is a high value, high return on investment type of education that's not just academic. It is so functional and so directly applicable and provides so much transferability to practice. That's been cool to see. And then to bring these people together. And like I said before, there's a few projects I've worked on with other societies, even outside of these four. But to work with these four and have us all just bring that passion has been really exciting.
Yeah. I would say for me, the big thing that I thought was, so what ended up happening, at least this is my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that each of the different associations that were a part of the collaboration got to pick someone that had kind of that sim ops focus, and then someone that had that SP and SP educator focus. And so I was selected by Naxal to be the SP and SP educator focus. And I didn't really think I was going to have anything to do with the sim ops aspect, or, we were just going to kind of split and then come together at the end and advocate for this. But that's not been the case. We've really worked very closely hand in hand. And though these paths cross in simulation, it's not necessarily a slam dunk, right? The perspective, the needs, as you said, there's some variations in that, much more closely aligned than what I what I had anticipated, because I didn't know much about the SimOps world, because my experiences were limited in the world I lived in at the university. But the other piece of this that I thought was really interesting, and again, I don't know how interested the viewers will be in this, but one of the things that Jeff Miller, who's on the committee, brought up is the fact that we're developing these job classifications to submit, is that we have to also socialize this to people that could potentially be opposed to the publication of this. And it was something that I had never considered before. And I think it's my eternal optimist mind of just everybody's going to love it as much as I do, and we're all just going to continue forward. But we now are at the point where we're talking about having to look at who are the legislators that are on the committee for the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor. Who do we need to kind of run this by to see, are there going to be roadblocks? Who do we need to talk to before this comes up? And so, almost in a way, kind of like a politician, where we're trying to figure out where there's potential barriers and then maybe making amendments or adjustments. And I think from my perspective, we're socializing it to the simulation world at large. And for those of you who are listening, if you are interested in filling out our surveys to find out exactly what you do and helping to make sure that we're doing a broad classification so it fits many people, but yet being specific enough that it makes sense for that particular profession, we do have those, and we can put that on with the publishing of the podcast. But the idea that we're also going to be, again, going outside of our bubble of simulation and socializing this outside of it. So thinking about healthcare systems that may be impacted by this, or large institutional accreditation bodies or things like that. And so taking it beyond that, to me, it's exciting to think about the fact that we could be, going down to Washington, D.C. and knocking on some doors, and just talking to them about the work that we do is another level of advocacy that I didn't think that I was ever going to be able to experience. So again, really cool stuff, really cool stuff.
It's such an interesting point, because I think the consensus building around all of this has been such an impactful thing. And, you and I have been involved in a couple of presentations at different conferences. We've had other folks presenting at different conferences, and kind of socializing it a little bit and looking for input. And it's been such a powerful experience to get that input and see things that, we talk as a committee about it, and feels like we're all on the same page and we all agree on this thing, and then we bring it to interested parties at these conferences, and they'll say, I don't like that, and here's why. And so then, having the conversation about, well, if we put conversations about degree requirements or conversations about certification, and where does that sit within this classification for the Department of Labor, and what implications does that have for the Department of Labor classification, but also for people who are trying to create these jobs out in the world. And then, to your point, where are we going to see the opposition to this, or reluctance in this? And it could be from anywhere, right? We have to look at who's on the Department of Labor boards. We have to look at our membership, and we have to, bringing these groups together, we have to be reaching consensus on what we think these classifications should or should not include, because it's such a delicate thing. And if, for the sake of argument, Matt Charnetski and Amy Cowperthwait both come forward and we're like, absolutely not, this is ridiculous, this doesn't match anything, and we say it to the right person, we're waiting another 5 years before we can even apply again.
Yeah.
And so getting it right and making sure that it is inclusive and representative is a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. And that we're considering who else we need to talk to before we submit it. And that's why we started 4 years almost in advance of when we think it's going to come out. Again, we don't know, but when we think it's going to come out, which is great. So I want to take a little bit of a right turn here, because we've talked a lot about advocacy and our work with AWISH, but there's something else that I recently read an article that was published in 2024. You were part of an article, and I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about how other people can advocate, right? Not everybody's on the AWISH committee, or not everybody's doing those things, but there's ways to advocate for healthcare simulation. And I always think back to my one of my colleagues, I mentors, I would say, but she talked to me about the fact that when you're a bedside nurse, and this is where I came from to start in the simulation world, your influence is one patient at a time. When you become an educator, your influence is multiple people, because you're now taking what you learned and you're passing it to the next generation. And so the idea of being able to influence in healthcare, it can be that you're advocating for healthcare within the institution that you work in. It could be that you're advocating for it within a regional simulation group, or it could be that you're doing it at a national or international level. And so I would hope that you would talk a little bit about the article that you wrote with a team of people on how it's really, again, I don't want to spend too much time because I want you to talk about it, but it's called the Global Consensus Statement on Simulation-Based Practice in Healthcare. And so you really spend a lot of time looking at it from a global perspective. Obviously, our work with AWISH is focused on North America, because we obviously couldn't do it at a global level. But could you talk a little bit about this article and the work that you did with that?
So I was super fortunate to be able to be brought into this group that was led by Christina Diaz Navarro from SESM and Bob Armstrong with SSH to put together this consensus building project where we ended up interviewing, I believe it was individuals from 50 different simulation societies representing 67 countries around the world. And we sent out a survey and we did some things with that, but then we also did these listening sessions where we bring together folks and have them just talk about, what are your concerns in sim? What are the things that you're working on? What are you most excited about? Where's the value? All of these things. And then we kind of brought all of that together and we parsed it out into some specific recommendations and a bit of a call to action. And I think what was interesting for me was seeing how many commonalities there were amongst people's experiences around the world as it relates to both the value they perceive of sim and the challenges they are currently experiencing. And a lot of it came back to advocacy, and a lot of we all know sim is great. We all see the value anecdotally and even through a lot of research in doing simulation. What we need help doing and what we need to all engage in doing is advocating. And sort of to your point, and on the board of SSH, I get a lot of flack for this because sometimes my mind wanders a bit, as you might imagine. And as we were talking about advocacy and we were talking about putting together toolkits and helping people advocate for simulation, we were talking about what I called big A advocacy, which is governmental work, international work, really big picture stuff. And then little a advocacy, which is things like elevator speeches and being able to talk to leadership within your department or within your organization and everything in between. And so this was an effort to help bring together common recommendations and a call to action surrounding those recommendations on where we should be advocating and what that little a and big A advocacy, how we can engage with that so that we can keep growing sim and we can keep helping the people that are closer to healthcare delivery, people who are closer to patient care, understand the value of sim. Not just that it's an educational modality, which it is, and it's a fantastic one, but it is part of the ecosystem of education that one should be receiving as they learn to be a professional, but also continuing education, and then also systems integration and testing and research, both on how we do sim and how we deliver healthcare, and on and on and on. So really putting together getting our arms around the idea of globally, how are we and how should we be advocating for simulation?
Yeah. And I think it's, again, I love the idea of the big A, little a. It could be as simple as inviting people in during healthcare simulation week that, are potential donors or legislators or your leadership at your school, all the way up to the idea of how do we as a global, and I would argue to say that the healthcare simulation industry is a global industry. It was a global industry before many were, because we were younger as far as what we do, but also there is so many commonalities, right there. The idea of providing good health care is something that, if you look at it from a global perspective, pretty much every country, every nation, is interested in doing that. And so how do we do that in a way that works? And the idea of that being advocacy, again, I think of it, when I think of advocacy, and I have to be honest, when Haru was president of SSH and started talking about it, it was really the first time that my eyes were opened about how do we do this, right? How do we get the word out? Because it is kind of that grassroots, underpinning, but we also now need to start really tying this into associations. And the reason I read the article was because I was actually reading the AACN, so the American Association of Colleges of Nursing, article on the nursing essentials, the new nursing essentials, and how simulation plays into that. And this was referenced, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna look this up and read more about it. But the piece of this that is so, to me, so now we have national organizations that are starting to read these and reference them. But how else can we really, again, work with other associations or get other associations to buy into the value of this healthcare simulation and add it into the regulations or add it into their expectations for certification? Any other thoughts on that?
I think some of the other work we've been doing, and we're seeing this in lots of places. We've seen Axel do this with the National League of Nursing and with the National State Boards of Nursing. We, SSH, have been engaged in some work with the National Association of EMS Educators and COAMSP, the organization that accredits EMS programs, as well as the National Registry of EMTs. And in looking to those professional organizations, that's the place where, or one of the places where we really have a lot of ability to exert power and influence just by being able to have the conversations with those folks to say, hey, ASPE, SSH, in Axel, we've got accreditation and endorsement processes. How do we integrate with your accreditation and endorsement processes to make it easier for people to demonstrate that they're doing high quality education, that they're doing high quality simulation? And is there a way that by leveraging what we know and what we've learned through our certifications, through our accreditations, that we can leverage to help you make recommendations on how your programs can best implement this? Because while there are tons of commonalities, we also know that each profession has different types of simulation that they lean on, and different kinds of simulation that they need to be able to create the experiences for their learners to be better prepared to go out into the field to practice healthcare wherever they do. And so with NEMC, NREMT, COAMSP, and SSH, we put together a joint position statement that was not on the same level as the global consensus statement. That was such a rigorous process. But this joint position statement was bringing together members of the board and individuals representing each of the different societies to say, we've recognized the value of SIM. This is where we kind of see us now, and this is where we need to be working towards. And that's kind of that mid-level of advocacy, where it's not governmental advocacy, it's not necessarily international advocacy, but it's putting things in place to help people above and below. So now when someone goes to their EMS program and they're a program coordinator for their EMS program, they can say, hey, these organizations that we trust, as well as these organizations that bring this specific expertise to the table, are advocating for XYZ. And here's the research, and here's all of the pieces in place to say, this is how we can do this and why it's going to benefit us as an organization, our learners as individuals, and their future patients. So seeing more and more of those partnerships amongst sim societies, but also with the different professional societies that are out there, I think is key to those next steps of advocacy. And then that builds to where when you go to advocate with your senator, with your congressperson, or your governor or mayor, or whatever it happens to be, now you have something more than, this isn't Amy or Matt coming to talk to you. This is us coming to talk to you, but we're coming with this background of these organizations that are recognized, that are known. And so now it just creates that extra weight, that extra justification. So it's not, I don't want to hear what you have to say, Matt. It's, oh, I'm actually interested in what you have to say because you aren't just you, you're part of this bigger thing.
Yeah, and you've spent time talking to a bunch of people and doing a bunch of work on it. One thing, I don't know if you know this, but I was talking. We were doing a podcast with Beth Hallmark, and she's on the board with an Axel, and she mentioned in the podcast that Washington State has put forth a regulation, and I don't know if it's just in nursing, but that they either need to be accredited by SSH or endorsed by an Axel, and they also need to have Chessie certified simulationists on their team. So it is a small step, right? But I hope that is something that is catching on to other states and future. Again, thinking about the idea of how do we do this, and it's kind of like how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? And so it's pretty interesting to I had no idea that had happened, and I'm excited to see that for the first time, and that our legislators are learning that these accreditation certifications are available, and that will help inform the fact that good simulation is happening, that there's recognition of the standards. It's kind of like the magnet with magnet hospitals, that that there's committees that are made up of people from all levels of the healthcare spectrum. And so this is the same kind of idea, but in a different way. And I'm just really excited I was really excited to hear that, but I did want to make sure that I mentioned it here because you do so much work with the advocacy for healthcare simulation.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I hadn't heard that either. And I try to talk to Beth as much as I possibly can. She's amazing.
Yeah, she is. Love her.
But yeah, I mean, we're seeing more and more of that. And even locally, I think here, when I first started, we had an accreditation visit. One of the schools we work with was starting a new program. They used us for SIM. So they came to us, and their accrediting body, I mean, just straight up said, what makes you think you are equipped to educate this group of learners through simulation? And I mean, for me, it was just sort of that bright shining moment where I was like, well, let me tell you why. and here's our certifications, here's our degree programs, here's the work that we do with these different societies that represent both the professional and the simulation professional side of things. And it was kind of that moment. And so to hear that that's becoming more common, or at least starting to spread, is outstanding.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to mention one thing. It's a weird word. You started off by talking about how you connected Scott with Haru, and you do that a lot. And there's a book out called Love Cat. And the way that it describes a love cat is that it is someone that is like, basically what you said, you listen to what people have to say, you hear their stories, and then you're like, you need to talk to so-and-so over here. And you connect these people to make a consensual good, or a better good in the end. So I wanted to draw, in case you want to look that book up, it was one of the books that I read when I started Avkin, but it really resonated with me. I wish they used a different word, because it's kind of strange to talk to people and go, hey, I hear you're a love cat, but anyway, it's a really interesting book. And it helped me in my journey of
I'll check it out.
not just asking for things, but also hearing what other people have to say, and then connecting those people. So providing mutual value in your conversations. So, well, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it, and great talk. And again, we'll be doing lots of work on AWISH together. So more to come.
Thank you for having me. Great
Thanks.
to see you, and we'll talk more soon.
All right. Have a good day.
All right. Well, I feel very lucky that we were able to have Matt on and learn a lot
too.
more about his perspective and everything, and his very unique life experiences in Antarctica and all of the different things that has really shaped him in his career, and how he landed here now. I think that's really exciting, and like you said, very easy to listen to in terms of
and
hearing
I think
his vision.
Again, working with him with the AWISH team and on the advocacy, moving forward to, I never realized how important it was for us to have the designated codes and Department of Labor. And I think that this has really opened my eyes. And I have to say that Matt emerged as a leader very quickly there. So I am confident that his leadership at SSH will translate very easily. As I said in the intro, he is super easy to talk to and has so many life experiences that you just could continue to talk to. We could have him on the podcast every season for real. He's just amazing.
Just a different take, just a different episode title.
And who knew that Antarctica would develop that initial bug for simulation education?
See, isn't that so funny too? Because we actually also know someone who lived in Antarctica. CPAT, he was a former standardized patient for us for a very long time.
And my nursing student.
And a nursing student for you. And he helped run sim for the EMS ambulance at the University of Delaware. Overall, just amazing person, but he also has spent a decent amount of time in Antarctica as a ER nurse. And again, it's just one of those, like, who would have thought that you got two people that you know that have actually lived in Antarctica?
Yeah, that's what I said. That's what I said on the interview. I was like, Matt, you're the second person I've ever met
Who would
that
have
lived
thought
there.
that? Who would have thought that?
But he said, I probably know people that he knows because
it's such a
even
tight
though
community.
they were years apart because it's such a tight-knit community, which is crazy.
Yeah. Well, that was an awesome interview. Thank you guys for being with us. And again, congrats, Matt. We're so happy for you. And we'll see you next time on the next episode of